Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? All right. Hi, my name is Jannette S. I'm a grateful member of Al-Anon. And thank you to everyone who made this possible. It's really exciting to be here at the Blue Hen Roundup, and I know service has saved me. So for everybody who's held any sort of service commitment to make this possible, really excited to be here. It's a beautiful setting. I'm looking forward to spending the day with you, and grateful for every single one of you. I'll cut straight to the chase. So I came into this lovely fellowship on November 9th, 2011, so I'm coming up on my 13th anniversary. But I qualified for this fellowship way long ago. So I'm a big believer that I found my way here when I was supposed to find my way here, but I came in 2011. My sponsor is Linda Vincent. I sponsor other people. I work the steps out of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And you know, really this program has saved my life. And so I have enormous gratitude for Alcoholics Anonymous, but Al-Anon is the one that has gotten me, you know, has saved me. So I'm grateful to be able to speak about my experience. So to start at the beginning, I could tell you I was an Al-Anon from the very beginning. Some of my earliest memories, I grew up in Minnesota. If you see me throughout the day, you can ask me to pronounce the word bag and bagel and roof, and you'll learn that I have a Minnesota accent. I've just sort of filtered it out over time. But I grew up in Minnesota, and you know, some of my earliest memories I think are indicative that I qualified for this program. One of my first earliest memories was right away in kindergarten. My favorite color was orange because I felt bad for it because nobody else liked it. Right? So I had to stand up for this color and protect it and make sure that people could love it like me. And I still carry orange to this day. It's one of my favorite colors. I don't feel as bad for it anymore. But, you know, and so that's where it begins. But, you know, shortly after that, one of my other earliest memories is my father, who is part of my story and is, you know, out there. And I can't call him an alcoholic, but I can tell you that his drinking troubles me. Is that we would go to hockey games, and you know, we would go to hockey games all the time, and he would typically drink at these games, and we would drive home, and he wouldn't always buckle his seatbelt. And like a good Al-Anon, and this was like 6 or 7 years old, I would turn to him and say, "Can you buckle your seatbelt, please?" Because I didn't want him to die, right? Like I already had fear instilled in me about death, fear about alcoholism. Like I knew you shouldn't be drinking, I knew you shouldn't be driving, and I really didn't want to lose him. One of the things that I always say, and I say it from the beginning, is I'm here because I love alcoholics. And I can't get enough of them. You're going to find them in all of my story. Like I love them. I can't stay away from them, and in fact, they're a really vital part of my life. And so, but I didn't know how to love them until I came into Al-Anon. I wasn't loving them. I was nagging them and being an absolute terror. And so I've learned to love them in a better way through Al-Anon. So I would tell my dad, you know, buckle your seatbelt. You know, one day he let me have a little sip of his drink. I didn't have that feeling that I've heard about in Oprah speaker meetings. It did not hear any. I was like, this is disgusting. And I was like, I'm out. I checked out. Like I was like, why would you drink this? Like I was immediately judging him. I didn't understand why you would want to try this stuff. And you know, so it sort of took off from there. The other thing about my Al-Anonism is I'm full of fear. And so at a young age, one of my parents' favorite stories to tell about me is every time they would leave me with a family member to take care of me, I would just sit at the window and cry. And just cry for like half hour, you know, and that's the only story my grandma told my whole life, was how I would cry when my mom left. And I cried because I was scared they wouldn't come back, or I'd be at daycare, and I was scared that I would be the last one to be picked up, and often I was the last one to be picked up. And you know, what I learned in here and what my sponsor's been able to show me is that, you know, as an Al-Anon, I have a real fear of being unwanted, alone, and unlovable. And I felt that really early on. I was loved beyond measure, but I had a fear that I wasn't. And I had a fear that I was going to be abandoned. And that meant that I held on to everything I could, as tightly as I could. And that includes my alcoholics. And so, So I started to grow up in a lovely home, really great parents. They took care of me. I was an only child for the first 8 years. Loved that. I loved being the focus of attention. And then somebody came along, a sister came along, and I got my first resentment. I wanted a brother. I wanted a brother. I didn't get what I wanted, right? And my disease is control. I thought I was getting a brother. Didn't get a brother. Never got one. And so we were off, and just living life. But ultimately, where I think alcoholism really starts to show up in my story is in high school. So I got to high school, and my parents' relationship was becoming increasingly rocky. And the way that I always sort of say you knew that I was in an alcoholic household is if my mom was vacuuming at about 5 a.m., then I knew my dad had been out all night drinking. And that happened pretty regularly. So my mom would get up very early, and I think this was part of her anger and, just part of her way to wake him up and make him suffer for being out all night. But she would vacuum at 5 a.m. and I was like, who vacuums at 5 a.m.? I'm judgmental too. You're gonna learn that about me as an Al-Anon. But I was like, who vacuums at 5 a.m.? And so that's how I started to go, something's not quite right in this household. My dad would be increasingly in and out of up and then out of the home. He would never drink at home, but he typically wouldn't come home if he had been drinking. And so that was sort of how I started to feel like things were off. And then I got to near the end of high school, at the end of my junior year of high school, my mom decided that she'd had enough and decided to file for divorce. And my father, whose drinking is definitely part of the story, became suicidal very quickly. And so the cops were called, there was a lot of drama in the house, and I just remember going, I can't tell anybody this happened. Nobody has this kind of family. Everybody's in this perfect married life, and I didn't tell anybody except my best friend what was going on in my life. Like, I let nobody in, and I learned here, I'm as sick of my secrets, and I kept a lot of secrets back then. I didn't want people to know that my life wasn't perfect. I didn't want people to know that my family was getting divorced, and I really didn't want people to know that the cops had come to my house and things like that. That didn't seem like things that were happening to anybody else. And I learned here they are happening to other people, and I'm not alone, but at that time I felt very, very alone. So my mother kicked my father out. I felt like I had to take a side. I took my mom's side. And then I was off to college shortly thereafter, but not without, my father getting a restraining order, not being able to see my high school graduation, and really essentially kicking that entire side of the family out of my life. And so I headed off to college, and I kind of essentially said, like, I want nothing to do with you until you'll say you're an alcoholic, until you'll get help. And that was at 18. I was trying to control his life when I was just a child myself, and I was trying to tell my dad what to do. It seemed so normal at the time, but now I know how I should have been in my own lane. And so I went to college. My father tried to contact me a few times throughout college. Through different people. He would have like a chaplain call me or somebody else call me. And every time I said, well, has he talked to you about his drinking? And they're like, no. And I said, well, until he talks to you about that, I don't want to talk to him. And I just cut him off and his entire family. And so I had a great grandma Ruby, who I loved dearly, and my great grandpa, they would feed squirrels out of the palm of their hand. They made this delicious grasshopper pie. Never saw them, right? Like, I was so in my disease that I just cut everybody off, and my grandparents as well. And so, I get through college. I'm the first person in my family to graduate from college. My dad's not there. He's not a part of my life. So, he checks out, he doesn't check out. I kick him out at 17, and I don't invite him back in. So I graduate college without him here. And, part of my story, and we'll get to it, is he does come back in, and I'm really grateful that that's the miracle of these rooms. It's the work that I can do through the steps to make amends and have him be a part of my life today. When I made amends to him several years ago, one of the first things he told me was he found every newspaper he could that announced the graduating class of the school I went to and cut those out because he knew I was graduating. He knew he couldn't be there, but he was watching me. He knew. And just to hear that was, touching, but also it just shows how much I missed out, because of my disease. I wasn't able to let him back into my life at that time. So throughout college, I pretty much stayed away from dating because I thought, I don't want to pick somebody like this. I really didn't want to repeat what my mom had done, and so I really kept the walls, I built curtain walls very high, didn't let people very close to me at all, and really was pretty isolated. I mean, I had a lot of great friends, but I was not really interested in dating because I just didn't want to run the risk of going through what I had already been through as a child. But then I graduate and I move out to New York, and so I head out to New York in 2001 to go to grad school, thinking, I'll go to grad school for a few years and head back to Minnesota. I've been in New York since 2001, and I'm grateful, I like New York, but I headed out to New York, and I thought, maybe this is the equivalent of a geographic or an Al-Anon. I was like, I'm in a different place, maybe I can date now, maybe things are gonna be good, I won't make those same mistakes. And so, I became open to the idea of dating, and I quickly found an alcoholic, because that's what we do. And you'll get to hear from him shortly, so his story is his. But I quickly found one, and he was exciting. He liked to drink, he liked to stay up, he liked music, he liked to, he just liked to have a good time, at least early on. And so I was on board. He was smart. I needed somebody who was smart, and it was a good starting spot. And so, I didn't know right away I had found an alcoholic. I just thought, he likes to drink. And then I was like, this is starting to bother me. Like, this is getting disruptive. We're missing things. I don't like how we're waking up. Nobody's feeling good in the morning. And it just started to, begin to rub me the wrong way. And so, I linger in that for a while. And the relationship proceeds, and we keep going forward, but I do start to say things, like I noticed the beer is getting stronger, there was this, we started with basic beer, and then we went up to some sort of percent beer. It was I can't even explain it to you because it's not my world, but I was like, we're drinking stronger beer now. And so I started to just really feel like things just weren't quite right. But I didn't know, I didn't really know what it was right away. And so, one of the big moments I would say in my story is, several years into our relationship, we went on a camping trip. And I share this because I think it's an important part. We went on a camping trip with some friends to a great place that we'd been before. And my partner, he started drinking early. I think it was actually the anniversary, or some music was playing that reminded him of somebody who had passed away recently, when one of his buddies, one of his people from college, and he started to get out of control, and he became suicidal really quickly, and he was like, I just want to go, and I can't even remember the exact words he said, but it was pretty much like, leave me alone, let me go. And all of us were sort of circling around him, wondering this isn't safe, you're drunk, you can't get in a car. But to show you the depths of Al-Anonism and how smart Al-Anons are, I went out and stood behind his car as he was trying to get away. And, thankfully it was just as winter was coming to an end, so there was ice on the ground underneath the car. His tires spun, so and the way that my sponsor shares this with me, and I fully agree with her, is at that point, I was suicidal. I was willing to die to try to save my alcoholic. And I would hope that was my bottom, but you're gonna learn, it wasn't. I had much more fun to have. And so, and I wasn't alone. Thankfully, his best friend was willing to die too. And so we were both standing behind his car, and his tires spun. He didn't get out. He tried to run into the woods. We called the cops. They took him to the psych center, and we did this huge intervention. Called his family up, did everything that I thought, this is what we got to do. If we all say we're worried about you, you'll get better. No, that's not it. And so it was the beginning when he started to learn, I have no power here. I'm powerless over this disease, because everything that I was trying to do just absolutely was not working. And so, you know, we come back from that incident, you know, somewhat open to recovery, both of us, but like I just threw myself into therapy, not even gonna talk about it because it was a waste of time for me. It was really just me trying to blame my parents for all this stuff, and it had nothing to do with them. Like I just wasn't ready to look at alcoholism and Al-Anonism at that point in time. But the one thing that I got from throwing myself into therapy before I found the program, my therapist kept saying, maybe you should go to Al-Anon. And she'd say it every now and then, I'd be like, no, I don't need a 12-step program, I got this, like, I'm figuring this out. But she would say it enough that a seed was planted, right? And this is in 2009, so I think 2007, 2009-ish. I don't come into the rooms until 2011. You know, I dabbled, I checked out a few meetings up where we used to live. I thought it was just for old people, and I left, right? And now I am one of these old people, but, and so I didn't stick. I just wasn't ready to look at myself. And then, you know, my disease got worse. I started, you know, Al-Anons are creepy. We could work in the FBI. Like, I just started to really kind of get very strategic in trying to figure out, has he been drinking, has he been drugging? I would arrange magnets on the filing cabinets where I knew he stored his goods, so that if he opened it, the magnet would move, and I would be able to go, oh, you drank something today. You know, and I would really and that's like the insanity, is I would go digging through the house to find anything I could to say, I caught you. What, like, it was doing nothing for me. It was just giving him a good excuse to drink. And I just was not fun, you know, so like I was absolutely sort of the nag. I was absolutely the person who was just trying to catch every single lie. And the other thing that I found during that time, and this is right before I come in, is I wasn't sleeping. I slept with one eye open, right? Like I felt like I had to catch him. I felt like I had to make sure he was alive, that he didn't die in his sleep. And so I don't remember having like a full night's sleep until I came into these rooms of Al-Anon. And now, and Nelson will tell you this too, like I fall asleep within like 5 minutes. It's ridiculous. Like I have no issue sleeping, and I think that's because of recovery. Like I just know this isn't me, like God's got it. And so I wasn't sleeping, and I was really just trying to control everything. You know, and if he didn't show up at home, I'd call the cops because I was worried he was missing or something happened to him. Or, you know, like I was quick to raise an alarm. And, you know, one of the things that we say in our rooms is you can always tell an alcoholic household by the Al-Anons. The Al-Anons are the crazy ones. Like we're the ones, like you all are having, like the alcoholics are having a good time. We're the ones calling the cops. We're the ones calling the ambulances. We're the ones like flaring up and chasing you around town. And my great-grand sponsor, she says it best. She's, you know, the big book says alcoholics are in full flight from reality. And Al-Anons are the ones chasing after them. And we're stone cold sober typically. So, you know, so like I'm pretty crazy. And I'm okay with that today. I actually find a lot of humor in how crazy I could be and how crazy I can be if I'm not staying stepped up. And so, you know, very quickly, after that, like it started to just get worse and worse and worse. And then eventually Nelson found his way. We pulled a geographic and we moved down to Poughkeepsie, New York, where my home group is Monday Night Stepped Up, Roundup. I forgot to say that earlier on. But I don't find them yet. But we moved to Poughkeepsie. Nelson finds a program. He finds AA. And he finds this initial sponsor. And one of the things his first sponsor told me was, you need to find this Stepped Up group in Rhinebeck, New York. Because I started going to open speaker AA meetings before Al-Anon. I was like, I'll go listen to what you guys are about. I don't need to do anything, but I'm going to listen to these stories. You told great stories, and I wanted to hear them. And so I went, you know, I started at these open speaker meetings, and you know, Nelson's first sponsor was initially, he was very quick to be like, you need a program, and this is the kind of program you need. You need structure, you need discipline, you need a big book program. And I was interested, but I didn't drive. That's another story. I didn't drive, and this was over a half-hour away, this meeting, and so I was like, I can't get to this meeting, this isn't gonna happen. But I started to go to meetings locally, and I started to pick up meetings, and then over time I was able to get up to this meeting that everybody had telling me to get to. And the first meeting I got to was, you know, I remember it very vividly. it was a reading out of One Day at a Time about whittling a piece of wood to restore character. It was like restoring us back to sort of sanity. And so it was really very much a hope meeting. And it was actually ended up being in my sponsor's house because somebody forgot the key to the church. Like, it was a really weird way to come in to my Step Up Al-Anon storyline, but it's so memorable and so vivid to me. Like, I can still remember the minute I surrendered. And at the end of that first meeting in Al-Anon, the woman who would become my first sponsor, Marilyn, came up to me, and she just looked at me, and she was, if you can believe it, just a little bit shorter than me, and just this beautiful beaming smile, gray hair, and she said, whether or not the alcoholic keeps drinking, you're going to be okay if you keep coming here. You know, and she essentially told me, like, just keep doing this and things are going to get better for you. And I just wanted what she had immediately. Like, I felt so loved, I felt so seen, and ultimately, I just felt like, oh, there is hope for me. And so it wasn't very long after that I asked her to sponsor me. And then she found out very quickly she had her hands full. So I came into these rooms. I am a people pleaser, so I do like, and this is my Al-Anonism, I like to do things by the book. I like to follow the rules. If you're not following the rules, I'll point it out to you. And so, like, I read all these things about, what the steps are, and we get into like this conversation about God. And my earliest story about God is in the 3rd grade when my sister, my first resentment, was born. My mom gave me the choice. She goes, we could either keep going to church, or if you want to sleep in on Sundays, we can sleep in. And I chose sleep in. You'll learn I love sleep. I chose sleep in. And so, and that was my beginning of my moving away from God, right? And I know now that was my choice. I moved away. God never moved away from me, but I began to distance myself from my God. And then, I had run in circles of academia for so long. Like, I really just knew school. Like, I stayed in grad school for a very long time. I'm still in school, or not in school, I'm not taking classes, but I work at a school now. I'm just comfortable being a student, because it's like, if you tell me how to get the A, I'll get the A. Like, I'm one of those people, I'm a perfectionist. And so I ran with academics who were similarly very skeptical about higher power, right? And so it didn't feel safe for me to even say the God word, because I knew that the circles I ran in, that the people I was with, they didn't talk about God. Most of them didn't believe in God. And I thought they would think I was crazy if I started talking about God. And this was my first huge hurdle, I would say, in Al-Anon, was how can I get a relationship with a higher power? And it didn't come early, it didn't come naturally. I think I ran on a we for a very long time. Like, my group was my higher power for a very, very long time. Like, there was something that they had that was so much bigger than me that I wanted it, and I knew that they were making good decisions, and I just kept making really poor decisions. And so, for a while they were that, then it shifted to the universe for a while. So I still like universe, but now I call it God. And I have a God of my own understanding, but it's through the work that I've gotten to do in these rooms. I had, thankfully, my first sponsor, my current sponsor, my first sponsor passes away, and so I move on to who was her sponsor, because I knew that I needed the structured big book Al-Anon, and so I asked her sponsor to sponsor me, and she doesn't play games, and I'm a debater too. I like to argue, and I can win arguments, but that's not good with sponsorship. So I'm learning. But I always want to, one of the things I heard early in my recovery was would you rather be right or would you rather be happy? I would almost always say right. That's the Al-Anon. I'd rather be happy. I will be miserable as long as I know that I'm right. And now it's changed, thankfully. I don't need to make everybody miserable just to prove that I'm right, and I don't need to prove that I'm right. If I'm right, God knows that. I don't need to show you that I'm right. And I used to always think I had to show you I was right. And so, she quickly put me into, doing inventories on my relationship with God, and things like that. But most of that came up because, as I worked through the steps, I got to the 8th and 9th step, and one of the things that our literature says is that you make an amends to God. And so I was by the book, I was like, okay, I gotta make an amends to God. I didn't believe it. I was like, how can I harm something that's greater than me? And then I got in this huge, I think it was just a pivotal moment in my recovery. Like my sponsor was like, we gotta go back to step 3. And so one of the biggest things that I have learned in these rooms is just how powerful step 3 is, how much I need to turn it over to God. And how quickly I can forget that, and how quickly I can just try to run on self-will. And so almost any time I'm facing an issue or a challenge in my program or in life, it's usually an opportunity for me to go back to step 3. So I read a lot of step 3, and I really, really intentionally try to grow as close to God as I can each and every single day that I can. And so, we had this little battle at step 8, and when I said I'm not making amends to God, went back to step 3, and I can't tell you how grateful I am that she had me do that work. And sometimes I'm like, I don't want to do this work, but I was so grateful because I could not have gone on to step 9 and looked people in the eye and said I was wrong if I didn't have God on my side, right? If I didn't have Him standing by me, I wouldn't be up here be able to speak if I didn't feel like I had Him with me. And so it all made sense. It didn't make sense at the time, but I think it was a struggle that I had to go through to get the recovery that I want to keep. And so, I do that work with my sponsor, and she sends me up to make amends. And Al-Anons destroy a lot of things too. Like I mentioned, I had cut my entire dad's side of the family out of my life, and really quickly when I found my Step Up Al-Anon group, my first sponsor immediately told me, she goes, you don't have to call them right now, but please send your dad, your grandparents, like cards on birthdays and holidays, right? Like, she was like, if we don't have to rush right into like having a relationship, but tell people like happy birthday, tell them, Merry Christmas, or whatever holidays you want to celebrate. And so she gave me this gentle suggestion to just begin kind of showing up in their life. And it felt safe, because I was in New York. They're all in Minnesota. They couldn't show up at my door. Like, I had some level of control, which Al-Anon's like. And so I started doing that. And then, a few years into my recovery, my dad, and this is before I'm even making amends, my dad sent me, we move on to emails. We still don't have phone numbers early on. But he sends me an email to let me know that his second wife passed away unexpectedly. And I had never met his second wife, but I knew he was married. And something immediately in my heart said, I need to call this man. Like, I hadn't spoken to him for over 18 years at this point. Like, we hadn't heard each other's voices. And I knew as he was going through that loss that I needed to pick up the phone and say, I love you, and how can I help? And so I asked my sponsor, because I wanted to make sure I wasn't doing something crazy, and she said, no, this is actually an appropriate time to call somebody. And that was my first call to my dad, was the moments after he had lost his wife. And I can remember his voice, and I can remember, you could hear how happy he was to hear from me, and I could hear how happy I was to have that relationship back. And I had spent so many years wondering if he was even alive, right? And one of my biggest fears is an Al-Anon, and it always is a fear, and thankfully there's somebody to turn it over, there's a God to turn it over to, is losing the alcoholics that I love. And this program had given me a place to turn that fear over to. But until I found Al-Anon, every single day I wondered, what if I never talk to him again before he dies? What if I never see him, never hug him? Like, I truly loved him, but I just knew how to be a punishing Al-Anon, and I just felt like he had to acknowledge he had a problem before I could have a relationship, and that's not the case. He doesn't have to acknowledge anything, and in fact, he hasn't acknowledged anything, and I'm okay. Like, we have a great relationship today. And so, I go into these amends, and, the other damage, I have that sister of mine, we're 8 years apart, so we were never super close just because I went off to college when she was like 10. But I will tell you, part of the reason we were never super close is I'm an interrogator, so I don't just ask one question, I ask 12. And so, like, she didn't want to share her life with me. I would get to about question 3 or 4, and she's like, you're done, you're cut off, leave me alone. She actually had pretty healthy boundaries. You know, but I was always just trying to like find out more stuff. And so like we didn't have a great relationship. Like I couldn't have conversations with her. You know, and through these rooms, I learned how to make an amends. I learned how to tell her I was wrong for the way that I approached that relationship, that I was wrong for the way that, you know, I was always just grilling her or always trying to like compare myself to her. You know, and you know, I learned like we have so much more in common. If I don't focus on how we're different, life gets a whole lot better. And you know, today I think she counts me as one of her closest friends, you know, and closest family. Obviously, one of her closest family members, but she literally counts me as like one of her closest friends. And I could have never dreamed of that before I found these rooms. Like we did not have a relationship. And now, like, you know, she was telling me. Actually, my mom was telling me the other day, like she went to get her nails done somewhere in Minnesota, and they were asking her if she had any siblings, and she goes, yeah, and she said that she was so happy to have a sister like me. And I was like, who is this? Like that program has done something to me that I'm so grateful that I have her in my life because she's my only sister. But before this, I wasn't thinking about that. I was just focused on myself and all the ways she was messing up. You know, she didn't do it by the book. She didn't go to school the way I went to school. She didn't do the, you know, like, I was just like, you're not me. But boy, this world would be horrible if everybody was me, trust me. Like, I'm great, I like to be myself, but I don't want everybody to be me anymore. But I used to try to make everybody be exactly how I wanted them to be. And that's just not fair. If anybody tried to do that to me, I'd be like, get out, like leave me alone. But I was trying to do that to everyone. I was just trying to play God. And so I know why she was not thrilled with me initially. But you know, one of my most powerful amends was actually going home to make an amends to my dad in person. And so my sponsor had told me, you know, pick a space that's kind of neutral because you haven't seen him in over 18 years. So I picked the Mall of America for an amends. If you've heard about the Mall of America, it's like one of the biggest malls in the country. Probably inappropriate for an amends. But we found ourselves in a little restaurant at the Mall of America, you know, tucked away in a quiet space. But before we did that, you know, we agreed to meet at the center space, and so I got there early, and he walked in, and I saw him just take like 3 really big breaths. And I just saw his body completely relax. And then he smiled, you know, and then we hugged. And then we went to, you know, have lunch, and I got to make a formal amends. And it's still vivid to this day. That was many years ago at this point. But like, we were just back. You know, we got our photo taken, we had somebody draw a picture of us, like we took selfies on our way out. But, you know, when I made my amends and I told him, you know, it was wrong for me to not have him in my life, that I did love him, that, you know, I hope he can forgive me. You know, he looked at me and, you know, he essentially said, I've never been mad at you. You know, like I had nothing but love for him, and then he actually mirrored the language that I used when I made an amends, you know. So he told me the ways in which he was wrong, and I wasn't expecting that, and it wasn't, I was doing it to clean up my side of the street, but it was just a really touching moment to have him back. And he's not, you know, he's not in my sister's life. He's not, you know, it's just us, and we keep it that way. Like, he knows, like, I can't speak for my sister, but we have, I think, you know, a touching relationship, and we text regularly. When I'm in town, I do see him. You know, we touch base when we can, and it's just it's a miracle of these rooms that he's back in my life. So I think the next story that really shows, I think, that this where I really had to lean into program, and I think this is really where I start to sort of let go and let God. Because God is this constant theme in my story of, you know, is it me, you know, my power, or is God in power? And self-will is so strong, and ego and pride are so strong in my story that while I had begun to grow closer to God, I still have my moments, and I still think like, oh, maybe if I just do it a little differently, then they'll stop drinking. And so we get up to about, I think it's like 2018. We had a fire in 2017 in our apartment, and so my partner and I, we had a fire in our apartment in the ceiling. I was coming home and I noticed smoke coming out of our ceiling. He had just left, I think, for an AA meeting, if I remember correctly. And so I saw smoke coming through our ceiling, and it was like a ceiling fan, something electrical with mice and stuff up in the attic went wrong. And we had 5 cats, because I'm a crazy cat lady. But I think if you divide it by 2, we're not as crazy. So we had 5 cats, and I immediately called 911 because I saw smoke, and I was like, I think there's a fire in our apartment. And they're like, okay, don't go in the apartment. I was like, well, I gotta get the cats out. I'll get them out and then we're good, you know. And Nelson came home really quickly also ran up to the apartment to try to get the cats out. We didn't get most of them. They survived. Spoiler alert. We didn't get most of them when the fire started, but the fire was contained to one room. And so we had to leave that apartment over like that minute. We got to grab a few things, and then we moved in through this fellowship. A lovely woman in Al-Anon welcomed us into her basement for about a month. So our 5 cats and us were hanging out in the basement. But we had a roof over our head, we had a home, we had a place to go because of this fellowship. And my sponsor offered us an immediate place to stay while we were getting that all sorted out. And she doesn't love cats, and she let us bring our cats to the place she let us stay. I mean, like, there was so much love shown to us in this chaotic moment. But it was a chaotic moment. And so that happens in October 2017. And in January 2018, if I'm remembering this correctly, I go out of work for a work trip to Washington, D.C., something I was excited for, and it was going to be like a 3-day event. So I left for this event, and everything was good. At this point in time, Nelson was going to meetings, he was in recovery. I got to D.C. and I tried calling him, and he didn't answer. And I was like, oh, maybe he's just taking a nap, So I was like, I'll call him a little bit later. Like, I didn't immediately go to, oh, we're in trouble. Because that's usually my instinct as an Al-Anon, is like, if somebody doesn't pick up the phone, we're in trouble. And so I didn't immediately doubt the world and doubt God. I was like, oh, he's probably just taking a nap. So then I tried calling later, no answer. Tried texting, no answer. Starting to get a little bit further away from God, right? I'm starting to freak out. Don't call my sponsor during any of this. And then, I'm like, I gotta go to bed. I have a work event in the morning. And I think I got up that morning and I had a call or a message from Nelson that he had been arrested for trying to drive his car off the bridge, to the Hudson Bridge. And I remember, I fell to my knees. Like, I was just like, how is this happening? Like, we had built this life, and how is this happening? But the first thing I did, old me would have hopped on a train, come home to get him out of jail, probably yelled at him a fair bit, made him clean up the apartment and all these, but the first thing I did is I called my sponsor. And I said, this has happened. What do I do? And she said, well, you have a commitment. And I said, I do. I have a work commitment. And one of the things I've been taught in these rooms is to honor my commitment. He was alive. He was hanging out, waiting for an AA member to come pick him up from the jail or wherever he was. So he was alive. She said, honor your commitment. And I said, okay. So I went to work. I can't say that I was fully present at work. I think definitely in my mind I was, putting some prayers up, not sure what I was going to come home to. But I went to work, and I didn't come home right away. And guess what? He was okay. AA scooped him up. His people came and got him. And I think it was probably, I can't say, we'll see. Maybe it was one of the best things that happened to him, right? But it was one of the best things that happened to me, because I got to learn that people are okay without me, that I don't need to save everyone, and that I can go about my day, and I can start my day over. Like, I can get really bad news, and I can physically get back into that hotel bed and get out and start over after I say some prayers. And like that reminder that I don't have to be the one. And in fact, I can't be that one, right? Like none of this was in my control. I was powerless, but I thank God that I was that far out of town. Like it just really made it so clear to me that I was not able to run to the rescue. And I think that, looking back on it, God was taking really good care of me by putting me in DC when this event happened. And so that was sort of my first signal of don't chase, hands off. Like let AA, let God, let everyone else take care of this. Like you've tried it all and it's not working very clearly. And so that's when I really start to sort of back out. I start to let go. And that's not an easy thing for an Al-Anon like me to let go. I would have to let go a few more times that year for I think the message to become clear, but I just started doing what I was supposed to be doing, going to my meetings, taking commitments, praying, calling my sponsor, and really just staying as stepped up as I could in the work that I was doing in this program, and showing up in the work that I was doing outside of that program, and letting my loved ones have their journey, because they're not my loved ones. I don't own them. They were never mine. I just get to be with them and love them. And so I was able to come home from that trip to DC, and I don't think I was mean. I think, I think I was able to come home and just be quiet. And that's strange for me, because I do like to talk. And so I was able to just embrace the silence and really just and not in a mean silence, but just let it be. Like it wasn't a good time, and we didn't need to make it a good time, and I didn't need to make anybody feel worse. And so that becomes a turning point for me of just really trying to learn how do I keep my hands off of somebody, and let somebody navigate the consequences of their own behavior, and it doesn't have to be me that imposes consequences. Sometimes there's consequences that are way more meaningful, in fact most of the time, more meaningful than any consequence that I can impose. And so I really just tried to sort of back out, but still continue to love him. And I love him to this day. We wouldn't be here if I didn't. But it was just a matter of getting my hands off of this person. And so, I think when I think about my recovery story, it really is one, there's so many things that come to mind for me. And I have to make sure that I'm working it outside of the rooms too. Like I can quickly throw myself into work. I love to work. I am a workaholic. And I have to remember, like I need to do the things I'm learning in these rooms, practice these steps and traditions in all parts of my life, not just for the few hours that I go to meetings every week. I go to 2 meetings a week and then an open speaker AA meeting. And I love that structure. It just works for me. And I've grown to have so much compassion for alcoholics. And I think that's not something I would have had if I didn't have Al-Anon. Whether it's reading the big book, and words, when I read the big book, we sub out words. Because it's my thinking. My thinking is absolutely crazy. I don't have to drink. It's just my thoughts. I'm just crazy alone. And so when I read that big book through that lens, but I also read it through the AA lens, and then I hear these open speaker meetings, I realized it had nothing to do with me. I used to always think, God, if you would just, you clearly don't love me. Why do you keep doing this? It has nothing to do with me. I know I'm loved. And I was looking for love in all the wrong places. I think the thing that I had to learn was, God loves me, and I'm just deeply loved, and I'm being held in this world. And so once I was able to get to that place and just let somebody have their journey, let them have the dignity to have their own journey, I think the miracles were able to begin for someone else. And I tried to do that. I would like to say everything was smooth from there on out. A few years back, we took a trip back home. And it became clear, my mom's drinking is really problematic to me. She didn't drink while we were home, but her hands were shaking the whole time we were with her. I knew, and I talked to my sister afterwards. She goes, "Yeah, I thought you would notice that," and I said, "I did, but I can love her, right?" And she knows I'm in these rooms. She's asked for our daily reader, but she doesn't know the AA side, and I don't think she may not even think she's an alcoholic, but I know her alcoholic drinking is really hard for me. But I have a program for that, and I can call my sponsor, and I can talk to other people. And, it just gives me a way to work with other people. And so, I think, so for me, it's really about God. One of my big stories is just learning how to find a God of my own understanding. He's not a guy up in the clouds looking down on me, but there is certainly a God of my understanding. And I used to be able to see it more so after something happened. Now I can see it when something is happening. And that's progress for me. I used to always have to wait to be able to look back and say, oh yeah, I was cared for. Now I can see how I'm being cared for every single step of the way that I take. And that's a powerful piece. But it's also just learning to stay in my lane. I like to get in people's business, and nobody invites me. Nobody asks me, what do you think I should do? Do you think I drink too much? Do you think, nobody's ever asked me anything where I offer advice. And so I think somebody told me recently, advice is just unsolicited criticism. I don't need to be that person. I just try to show up and be loving and kind. And really, I think the key and the thing that has saved me so much is service. I think it's harder, the more time you're around, it's hard to get these service commitments because those newcomers put their hands up so fast. And I'm grateful because that's what I did. But service is the thing that just keeps me going, and it's every time that I've had a major moment or major, not even a catastrophe, but a challenge to my program, I've always had a service commitment. When we had this big issue with the DWI on the bridge, my service commitment was a speaking commitment on Thursday night. I was the speaker on our Thursday night meeting. So I got to show up 4 days later after this incident happened and cry in front of my group and tell them what was going on in my life. And I got nothing but love and a reminder to keep putting this program first. And so the piece of advice I get from my first sponsor that I bring forward every time, and we were just talking about this last night, is I was taught very early, if I'm coasting, I'm going downhill. So I need to be fully in. Half measures are going to do nothing for me, and I need to put this program first. So when I start to think, oh, I can take this night off, and also, I'll say that, I'll be maybe I can just take a Thursday night off, but I don't typically, right? I don't do that anymore because I know how much this program saves me. And I also know if I take enough of those nights off, I'm going to be pretty miserable to hang out with. I'm going to be quickly back in my old disease. And so I really try to stay in service, and it's an honor. I do want to thank Christine for asking me to speak today, and all of you for welcoming us so kindly into this space. It's always an honor to be asked to speak. I'm one but many. I'm just I say I'm a garden variety Al-Anon. I think there's a few types of us, but I'm just as crazy as everyone else, and I'm really excited that there's a solution and that I can be the solution today. So thank you so much.